Hey everybody, James Introcaso here. Just wanted to take a moment to let you know about 2C Gaming. They are one of the sponsors of this episode of Tabletop Babble. And I wanted to tell you all about 2C Gaming's new Kickstarter for the Lion's Vault. 2C Gaming is a small indie publisher that funds their projects through Kickstarter. They specialize in 5e and Pathfinder fantasy supplements. And right now they're in the middle of putting out an epic 6-part adventure line. The Lion's Vault is part 3 of that 6-part adventure path, available for both 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder. Each module explores a different theme. The first was a dungeon crawl with multi-stage boss encounters and challenging puzzles. The second was focused on intrigue, diplomacy, and forging alliances with multiple factions. This adventure, The Lion's Vault, focuses on disease and corruption with a powerful plague that has lasting consequences for the world. If this sounds good to you, parts 1 and 2 are available as part of the Everything Kickstarter tier. You can check it out at 2cgaming.com. Look for The Lion's Vault. It's available in print and PDF, and the deluxe digital package gives you access to virtual tabletop resources like maps and tokens that you can use on Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds. So go check it out, 2cgaming.com. Thank you so much for sponsoring this episode of Tabletop Babble. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. This week on the show, I am talking with the amazing Jeff Stormer, the host of the Party of One podcast, about what it's like to run one-player, one-GM games. Jeff has a ton of experience with this. If you've ever listened to his podcast, this is what it is. It's a one-player, one-GM actual play. So let's dive right into my conversation with him. All right, everybody. Now I'm here with an amazing individual named Jeff Stormer. Jeff, for the people out there who don't know, and they should know you, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
So for the people that don't know me, my name's Jeff Stormer. As you just said, I don't know why I needed to repeat that, but I am a podcaster, game designer. Most notably, I am the host of a podcast called Party of One. It is an actual play RPG podcast focused on 2-player role-playing games. So every week, I sit down with a guest one-on-one, and we play either a game designed for 2 people or a game not designed for 2 people that we've sort of retrofitted and hacked into a 2-player format to kind of see what happens when you do that and how different games run with only 2 people involved.
Sure, and talk to me a little bit about some of the games you've played, because you have many, many episodes up here, and there's a lot of fun games that you've played, some that I didn't think were possible just one-on-one.
I'm very proud of some of the games that we've run with. So within the 2-player space, we've run basically, if it's for 2 players, we're either playing it or we're getting to it. Some of my favorites, the 2-player games we played, are Dan Ender's The Bite, which we played with Rich Howard, and he still holds that against me, and it's wonderful. We've played Our Radios Are Dying. We just played Showdown by Seth Ben Ezra, which is a cool dueling game. And then speaking of dueling games, we also played Jim McClure's Reflections,
of course,
which is super fun. It's beyond fun. And then within the 2-player, or the not 2-player hacking space, we've done Dungeon World and D&D 5th Edition and Feng Shui 2 and some White Wolf stuff. We've done a whole lot of different things. We played Paranoia, which was an interesting experience. I don't know if I would do it again, but it was more fun than I thought 2-player Paranoia would be. I'll say that.
I thought that would be impossible before you went ahead and did that. But you really are the master of adapting RPGs that aren't meant for 2 players for 2 as well. What are some of the games that you've done that with?
We've adapted Dungeon World a few different ways, which I was really happy with how that worked out. We did a GM-less take on Dungeon World, which was very cool. Feng Shui 2 is an interesting approach because I always kind of say that running a game not designed for 2 with 2 people is kind of driving a car, taking out a part, and seeing if the car still runs. Because one of the games that we've run a few times is Fate. We played a few different Fate games, and playing that, like, adapting that into a two-player format is fun but tricky because advantages become a real tricky thing because people don't tend to go for them when they're the only player. So it becomes a matter of, like, how does this game work if the player's not making advantages and invoking them and they're just sort of going for actions?
How does the game work if you're doing that?
Interesting. It can be a little bit challenging for the player, as is. I found that the thing to do is sort of institute like a momentum system, where the player, if they're successful in an action, just gets to keep rolling actions until they're not successful in something. Because that way they have the option of, like, making an advantage, invoking that advantage on the next roll. If that's successful, they can keep piling on other things. It sort of simulates a group player environment. Like, it simulates having 3 or 4 players, even if you only have the one character on the table.
So, here's the thing. I think we've all tried to do this at some point in our gaming lives, right? Run a 2-player role-playing game. You're, as we've said, the master. You've done it a lot of times. You've done it with all kinds of people. And so, how do we do it, right? Like, how do I play 5th edition D&D when all of my players but one bail? How do you recommend we do that? What do we focus on? You know, where do we start? Because it's sort of mind-boggling to think about that.
The thing that I've always found is helpful to think about when running a game, especially like running a game with only one other person. When you're GMing a game with only one person, I find the best thing to think about and sort of the best way to approach it is to think about TV or movies, or really, you know, most of our narratives only involve one central protagonist. There are support characters, but most of the media that we intake, right, involves one central character. So I think if you approach a single-player game, if you're sitting down to play D&D, and your character says, all right, I've got a rogue, they're a pickpocket thief, they're wanted by some authorities, what are we doing? The approach I've always found that works is thinking about it like this is that character's solo movie, right? So, like, okay, they said they're wanted by the authorities. Okay, so then this adventure is just going to be them ducking police, going on a heist. This is their story, and it is their chance to tell their story that they can't necessarily tell in a larger group format, which is what I think one of the big advantages of duet play is you get to tell stories that are smaller and more personal and more maybe idiosyncratic than you would in a larger space, because, like, you're not trying to balance 4 to 6 people's ongoing narratives as well as the story that you want to tell yourself.
Sure, you get to go a little deeper. You get to be a little more introspective, right?
Mm-hmm. The analogy that I would make is I've always looked at it like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Mm-hmm. The way that, like, when you get a full party together, it's the Avengers, right? You've got your central objective, everybody's kind of bouncing off of each other. You get a little bit of Captain America's, like, personal story. You get a little bit of his rivalry with Iron Man. Like, there's bits and pieces, but then if we break off and do a solo adventure, that's the Winter Soldier. Then I get to be like, okay, let's explore what it means to be woken up in 2016 when you fell asleep in 1945. Let's explore that. Let's explore how the world has changed. Now we get to really get into the kinds of stories that you want to tell.
Do you find that when you're running a game like this, you're providing more sort of NPC allies, not necessarily people who adventure along, but like in your Captain America example, right? There might be somebody like a Howard Stark who's building equipment that might fill the gaps where the character, you know, if they're a Captain America type, maybe they have a machine that helps them do some things that Captain America can't do.
Sure.
Whereas, you know, you might have like a brains of the operation if you had a full party of adventurers.
Yeah, I do find that to be something that comes up a lot. I don't think it's a tricky thing is I don't think it's often literal allies or like tangible pieces of equipment. But I think you do end up creating a lot of set pieces and opportunities and plot hooks and that kind of thing that are more narrowly focused. So for in a Captain America example, I'm probably going to create, like, threats to in air quotes, like the American way of life, or things that Captain America finds valuable. The hooks that I'm dangling in front of Captain America are Captain America specific. I'm not going to pull up a threat to Asgard, put it in front of Captain America and say, because I know that he's not necessarily going to take that bait. He might, which would be really cool if he did, but, like, he's more inclined to take, hey, Bucky might still be alive.
Sure. Have you played Cthulhu Confidential yet? Uses Gumshoe's 1-to-1 system.
I have. I love it. It's fantastic. And, like, the changes they made to the system, because we actually played, one of our first episodes is we played the Esoterrorists.
Right.
Back in 2015. And before they had even really announced 1-to-1 was coming. We played it, and it plays really well. And then they were like, hey, we're making a 2-player version. And I said, this is great. This is gonna work. And then I played it, and the changes they made to the system are just chef's kiss. It's just perfect.
It really is. It's really a streamlined system for 2-player play. One of the things they talk about in that book is being over-prepared, because Gumshoe itself is a mystery game, right? And so they say, if you're the game master, you want to make sure you've thought about a lot more of the story than maybe you normally would if you were running a game with lots of other people. Do you find that's true for all games that are, 1-to-1, or is that really just for heavy mystery games?
I find that I tend to be more prepared for one-on-one games than I would other games in general. I find that I'm a little more railroady, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think, like, if I'm playing with one person, we're both carrying so much of the narrative that I can afford to be a little more direct and be like, hey, here's the plot hook. And the player is a little, my players are generally a little more ready to say, all right, that's the plot hook that we're going with. I don't sort of have to dangle 6 things and hope the players take one of them, because I'm dangling plot hooks that are specific to the person playing. So it kind of is a thing of, like, I tend to script a little more of, like, okay, here's where we're gonna start. I can kind of predict the next few steps of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm wrong, I can always, like, sidestep it, but it's a little more structured than I think the games that I run with larger groups tend to be, which are generally, in my case, pretty loose and freeform and adaptive.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's very true, and you only need to appeal to one type of player, right? You don't need to necessarily appeal to a person who wants to kill stuff, and a person who wants to role play, and a person who wants to, although a balanced story generally has a lot of those elements, you really get to do some fun things. Like I see in your latest episode, you recorded a Hot Guys Making Out with James D'Amato. Is that right?
Hot Guys Making Out with James D'Amato. Hot Guys Making Out is one of my favorite role-playing game titles, and I love it for playing it on the show, because the naming structure of it works so well with, like, because the format of a Party of One episode title is the game title with my guest. So I get to make the episode title Hot Guys Making Out with James D'Amato. That's SEO clicks, baby.
Mm-hmm, that definitely is. And it's funny because, and James D'Amato has played every game under the sun as well, right? It's interesting because I was thinking, as I looked through your list and listened to your back catalog, you really have a gift for selecting the right player for the right game too, which is really something fascinating and fun to listen to. And I think that's something to keep in mind when you're playing D&D. Right, you might have a friend who, like, maybe D&D is not their favorite role-playing game, but they come to the table because there's 6 of their friends around, right? And they have a good time. Where if it's just you and that friend, maybe play something else, right?
Yeah, and that's actually something that's very specifically done by design, because whenever I'm talking to somebody about coming onto the show, the first thing that I generally ask them, unless I have, like, a game in hand that I'm like, I want to play this on the show, let me find somebody who will be a good fit for it. if I'm coming to you because I want you on the show, not because I want a particular game on the show, the first thing that I will ask you is like, who or what do you want to play? Because in my mind, every episode is my episode, right? Like, every game that I play is a game that I get to play. The guest is, it's the guest's episode. That's why they're in the title. So I want to make it the story and the game and the experience that they want to tell extremely specifically, because I think you're going to get the best game out of that. And I think that 100% applies to your home game as well, of like, find the character and the setting and the game and the story that they want to tell. And I think you'll get so much more of a response. And in a two-player format, that story can be as specific or as broad as you want it to be. I think that you'll get a much better experience out of it.
Definitely. What do you think are some of the advantages of playing one-on-one? For me, one of the biggest is pretty practical too, right? Like, we were talking about intimate storytelling, and I think you get a much bigger scale of that, and you can cover a lot of ground in a one-on-one game. I think you're not waiting for everybody to take their turn and do their thing. But the other thing for me is like convenience. It's a lot easier to find one friend than it is to find five, right?
I mean, it's real good for scheduling podcasts, I'll tell you that much. The advantages for me are, like you said, intimate storytelling. I love getting a player to an emotional place, because the thing about two-player games, right? The thing about two-person conversations, and this includes the one that we're having right now, is we don't have a lot of them in our day-to-day lives, right? Like, you know, you think about the scenarios in which you're talking to a person one-on-one. It's like you're chatting with a family member, you're catching up with a good friend, you're going on a date with a romantic partner, you're talking to your boss about work stuff. There's not a lot of extended one-on-one conversations that happen regularly. You know, you might talk to the guy at the deli for a few minutes, but you're not sitting down with them across a table, looking them in the eyes and chatting with them for an hour. At least not in any of the delis in Philly. I would like that deli, because that sounds amazing, but...
You're absolutely right. It's definitely not happening probably at any deli in the Northeast in America.
Right. So, like, that kind of conversation, there's an emotional intimacy there that I think is so fun to explore, because, like, you can just... It goes back to being able to tell stories you can't really tell in a group. Like, you can play in a really emotional, sad game with a full group, but I think people's walls tend to be a little lower if you're sitting with someone one-on-one and you're like, I want to go to an emotionally vulnerable place. It's a little bit easier to do that, and since that's the kind of a type of storytelling and a type of role-playing that I really enjoy, getting to do that one-on-one with people is really gratifying, and it's great that I have that venue for it.
Hey everybody, we're just going to take a quick break so I can let you know about Kobold Press, a third-party design company that builds RPG products with a range of books and supplements on monsters, adventures, and settings for both Pathfinder, 13th Age, and 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. The Kobold-in-Chief is Wolfgang Bauer, a well-known game designer who has been a guest on this very podcast. You may have heard of some of their projects. Tome of Beasts, the Midgard campaign setting, Deep Magic, all of that is awesome, and now Kobold is bringing you Warlock. Warlock is a new Patreon-supported project from Kobold Press. With your support, the Kobolds can make 5e Midgard campaign material on a regular, ongoing basis. I am a member of this Patreon, and it is going to turn out some of the best 5e content you can get. I'm talking about new maps, new monsters, new 5e character options. Help expand the world of 5th edition dark fantasy at patreon.com/koboldpress. That's patreon.com/koboldpress. patreon.com/koboldpress.
It's just such a lovely podcast to listen to. I've been catching up on old episodes and stuff since we've set up this podcast, and I just can't say enough good things about it. People should really check out Party of One, and it's such a great idea. What made you want to do this podcast? Had you played a lot of one-on-one games before this?
I have been interested in one-on-one games for longer than I'd been playing them. It was something where I started looking into them, I guess about 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. I was recently, because I knew that I knew that we were going to be having this interview, I started really thinking about, like, the first time I played a role-playing game one-on-one, and I realized it's not a full role-playing game, or at least the designers intend it to not be the full role-playing game. But the first time I sat down one-on-one with somebody and role-played was a game of Traveler that was like maybe 7-8 years ago. We sat down with the dice and the book, and we said, all right, I'm running a Traveler campaign. We all need to make characters. I'm going to sit down with each of you, and we're going to roll up the character process. Now, you know the process of Traveler is an hours-long, intricate thing of rolling dice, and you can die during character creation. It's a whole thing. So, I sat down with my friend Mycroft, and the two of us rolled dice and created this character and told this guy's life story over the course of like 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, I still think about that character from time to time because he went on such a journey throughout. He had such an inspiring life. And then we sat down to play Traveler, and it was fun, but like that experience of like playing this character and watching him grow and change and, you know, fall short of his goals, but then achieve other goals. It was just so cool that it never really left my brain. So then flash forward a few years later, I had just moved in with my girlfriend, now wife, and the two of us were talking, and I was talking about, like, I had just left a role-playing group, right? Like, we had just the game had kind of fallen apart. And I was talking, and I was like, man, I really, like, miss having a good opportunity to play role-playing games. And she was like, well, are there any games that, like, just the two of us can play? And that's kind of when I started, like, researching it and trying to find games, trying to make games, which was a disaster. I started trying to, like, really research what two-player role-playing was, what the resources available for it. And at the time, there was, if you Googled two-player role-playing games, when I started, and I know this because I Googled two-player role-playing games, what you got was about a half a dozen RPG-net discussion threads of people asking this question, and people basically saying, I don't know, maybe you play like a whole group? I don't think you can do that. And the cool thing about keeping an eye on it and kind of learning it since then, and especially since doing the podcast, is there's been an explosion of, like, games that are designed for two people that are, like, or even just articles and resources of people saying, alright, I'm playing this game with two people, here's what it was like, here's what I would do differently, here's what was cool about it, and then there's people making games for two people. It's just been the coolest experience to just be present for that and to be a part of it, as small a part of it as I am, to watch this thing happen. It's so cool.
Oh yeah, I think you're definitely part of a revolution in this style of storytelling gaming and in storytelling gaming in general, right? I think the more we see role-playing games and storytelling games take off, the more we're going to see people want to be able to do it, you know, like at home with their significant other. And that's what's been so awesome about this, is it's opened my mind up to, like, well, I could do this instead of rewatching Buffy for the 7th time with my wife. And that's pretty awesome. Do you do this a lot with your wife?
We do it from time to time. What has happened more than, like, dedicated sit-down to playtime is we have sort of taken up playtesting games for the show. So it's changed, but we do it from time to time where I'm like, hey, do you want to play this game? Because I got to play it for a live show in a week. So we'll sit down and we'll play through a game of it. We'll talk about, like, if it worked. And so, like, we still do it. It's changed since I have the podcast. But that's fun in its own way, right? Because it's like we're hashing out the show and, like, producing it and doing a whole thing.
Of course. It's so cool, and it's so cool that you're able to do live shows. I think the nimbleness of 2 players really helps you with that as well.
Oh, for sure.
What have been some of your favorite games for you to play one-on-one that aren't actually one-on-one games?
Like, I mentioned it earlier, but, like, Paranoia was really actually very fun to play. It was very different than the experience that you get with a group, but I kind of envisioned it as a bit like a puzzle box, where I was just presenting sort of unwinnable scenarios to my player of like, hey, look, you're gonna get busted for treason right now. There's no way out of this. Like, 7 different things are going wrong, and watching him, like, squirm and weasel and paranoia his way out of it was, like, super unbelievably fun.
Yeah, it sounds awesome.
I really enjoyed, another episode we played recently that I really loved, 2-player, was, Dogs in the Vineyard. That game was super cool, because it's, like, a moral journey of this one character, and, like, watching them in a world where they're basically unchecked, because in a full group Dogs in the Vineyard game, you know, it's Mormon-ish sheriffs and cowboys kind of policing this semi-magical Wild West.
Great description.
Thank you. And one of the plot caveats of the game is that the dogs are unchecked moral authority. No one questions a dog. Even if you don't agree with them, they're the law, right? And so when a group, one of the big dynamics that happens is the players end up kind of policing each other a little bit, and it sort of becomes a group discussion of morality. With one player, what it becomes is that person going on their own personal journey of like, where's the line? How do I feel about this issue that has been, or this quandary that has been put in front of me? How do I feel about it? And like, them having this discussion without anybody to bounce it off of is super cool. And then, the other kinds of games, there's a few of them. There's a few games that I love playing with 2 players because I describe them as secretly 2-player games that have group mechanics bolted onto them. White Wolf games, a lot of them fall into this description. Promethean in particular is a game that is designed for 2 people. I do not believe that you play that game with more than one protagonist.
What makes you say that about this game? I'm not super familiar with Promethean.
So Promethean is a White Wolf game about Frankenstein's monster. It is beings made of undead flesh that are imbued with divine fire, and that brought them to life, but it's sort of an unlife, and they're kind of going on a Pinocchio journey to try and become real people.
I'm on board.
It's super fun. It's a rad game. And part of it is, they're being undead, they're being unnatural creations that should not be alive, has instilled in them a sense of what is called disquiet. The idea is reality is rejecting them. Like a mismatched organ, they are being pushed out of the world. So if they hang around in one place, plants start to wither and die. Birds and animals will run in any direction. People start acting on their basest impulses, unnaturally so. So Frankensteins, I think, are defined by anger. So if you are of the lineage of Frankenstein, people start getting angry for no reason, and suddenly fights are breaking out, and anarchy is spreading, and chaos is burning things down. All because you are staying in one place. The world itself is saying, we don't want you here. And you have to try and complete your journey to become a human, to find what defines humanity for you, and achieve all of this, while reality is literally trying to destroy, while the very existence you are leading is trying to destroy you. And then there are rules for, hey, if 5 of you hang out, you get special powers. And it's I don't buy that. I don't buy that part of the story.
That's kind of a cool way to put it. You know, the Frankenstein's monster analogy makes sense, especially because pretty much every character in the story of Frankenstein is a loner.
Right.
So what do you think is the way to get started in one-on-one gaming? If there's people out there who only have one friend, maybe there's no conventions or local friendly game stores where people play close to them. How do they get started doing this?
I think that a lot of the way that I would recommend getting started playing two-player games is really kind of similarly to how I would get started playing a group game, is sit down with one person and say, hey, do you want to play Dungeons and Dragons? And like, you know, start that conversation and then say like, hey, I've got games, or, you know, I know how to do this one-on-one. Like, we can do it one-on-one. And then start asking questions of like, okay, if we're like, what story do you want to tell? Like, do you want to play a sci-fi game? Do you want to play Buffy instead of watching it? Like, starting that conversation with like, hey, what kind of game do you want to play, or would you want to play if you had complete and final say in the matter? If you were the executive producer of whatever movie or show we're about to create in our minds, what movie or show would you want it to be? And then kind of go build it from there, right? Like, you're like, okay, you want to do like a slice of life type story. Let me like kind of look up and dig up a game that will tell a slice of life story. Okay, I've got a game for that. And then start building the character. It feels to me similar to like a Session Zero in a Dungeon World game, or in a Powered by the Apocalypse game. Is sitting down and saying, hey, let's play a cool game, and then start building the story from there.
Do you think because these games are more intimate and more intense, just with the respect to like, if you're used to maybe playing and not running a game, or you're used to running huge groups, it's two people spending, you know, hours together telling this story. For people who are maybe like, oh, that intensity scares me off. I don't want necessarily to be that intimate. Sure. Do you have advice for what to do in those situations?
I think the thing to do then is sort of, and this is something that we've done prepping for the show before, is people have said, I want to play a lightweight game. Like, I don't really want to get serious with it. So when I ask people, what type of story do you want to tell? People have come back and been like, I don't really want to get too serious with it. I don't really want to get too heavy. I kind of just want to like laugh and goof and do something light and fun. That kind of sets the tone, and then you can kind of dial that story, or like, you know, like tailor that story to that person. So I think it kind of boils down to the same answer as last time, which is when you're talking about, when you breach the conversation of like, what do you want to play? If you're worried about it getting too real, then just say up front, I kind of want to keep it light and fun. And then you can find a game that is light and fun and not, you know, The Bite, where I made Rich Howard cry.
It's an amazing. People should totally listen to The Bite, by the way. It's amazing. Rich does a great job. You do a great job with that. And that is why there are tears. We should be clear about that. It's not like you bully Rich into crying.
No, it's an amazing game that we played our hearts out.
Yes. Yeah. And Rich is and I mean this in the highest form of compliment. Rich is very in touch with who he is and what he is feeling. And it's awesome because it makes him a super aware, super empathetic person. And that's why he's great to play these games with.
For sure.
Yeah, it is just a great cast. People should totally check that out. And if people want to check out more of what you do, where should they go and what should they do?
If you want to check out more of Party of One, if you want to hear what it's all about, you can head over to partyofonepodcast.com. You can check out the full show. You can also tweet at me at Party of One Pod. I always say the best thing to do is, if you're looking to get started, is to tweet me a mood, and then I can recommend it from there, because one of the things about the show is that, you know, one of the things about two-player role-playing is that the stories vary so wildly episode to episode that if you're looking for a funny game, then I want to make sure I don't send you in the direction of The Bite or Our Radios Are Dying, which are sad, emotional episodes. But if you're like, yo, I want to feel like Rich, when he first got into the show, he tweeted at me. He's like, I asked him this exact question, and he said, I want something that's serious and heavy and emotional because that's the kind of story that I want to listen to. And I sent him the episode for that, and it hooked him immediately. Or if you want something funnier, I can send that your way as well. But partyofonepodcast.com, Party of One Pod on Twitter, Facebook as well, wherever fine podcasts are sold.
Jeff, thank you so much for coming on today. This was a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed listening to your cast so far, and I can't wait to get all caught up. So people should definitely check out Party of One.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot.
That was a great conversation with Jeff. He has a great podcast. You should check it out. And hey, if you think this is a great podcast, why not go leave us a great 5-star rating on iTunes? It helps other people find the show, and a lot of other podcatcher apps use the iTunes algorithms to make their own rankings. So even if you don't have an iTunes account, go make one, rank us, and rank all the other podcasts that you love. And you might get me reading your review verbatim out loud here on the show, as I will do right now with a 5-star review. Today's 5-star review comes from P.A. Lightman. Perhaps Paige Lightman, guest of this show sometimes. She is awesome. Paige says, James always delivers the goods. TTB is one of my favorite podcasts for all things related to role-playing games. Great guests, wide net of topics, interesting questions, and information dense. Not just a lot of fluffy banter. James gets to the meat of the information. Well, thank you, Politeman, so much for leaving this 5-star review. People, go leave us one right now. And hey, DSPN is a great network that Tabletop Babble is part of. I think you should check out all the other great shows on the network, like Game O'Clock. If you're into video games, Rudy Basso and his brother Alex bring on different guests and dive deep into the history, favorites, least favorites, and future of a very specific video game genre. It is awesome. They're going to keep this thing going for a long time, and there's going to be lots of great content to listen to. So check out Game O'Clock on Don't Split the Podcast Network. And if you already love the other shows on DSPN, come to our Gen Con panel on Thursday. If you're going to be at Gen Con, so are we. It's a free panel. There's going to be fun prizes. Rudy Basso will be there. Alex Basso will be there. Vegas Lancaster will be there. Celeste Konowich and Brittany Quintero from the Venture Maidens will be there. We'll be taking your questions, handing out prizes, and we're going to go party at a secret location to be revealed at the panel afterwards. So come see us. Get your free tickets now. Go to the Gen Con event finder and just type in DSPN. We're the only thing that comes up. People, you can follow me on Twitter at James Introcaso. That's at JamesIntrocaso. And also check out my blog, worldbuilderblog.com, to get updates on all the game design things that I am doing. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network, thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Thank you so much to them. Remember, RPGs are like sex. Hey everybody, James Introcaso here. One last thing, I wanted to tell you all about Playground Adventures. Playground Adventures is a third-party design company for RPG products with a focus on adventures and activities for kids. Run by husband and wife team Daniel Marshall and BJ Hensley, who are two huge names in the industry, Playground strives to make adventures that are both fun and educational for younger children and for the whole family. Zeitgeist says Creature Components, one of their amazing products that made number 5 on the top 10 Zeitgeist list, They say there is narrative potential for years in the system presented here, and I absolutely love it to bits. This book is stellar and deserves a final verdict of 5 stars plus a seal of approval. This is a candidate for my top 10 of 2016 and receives the EZG Essentials tag. That is high praise from Zeitgeist. You get all kinds of different great product lines from them. Educational gaming with the Fun and Facts line, such as For the Hive, an adventure that teaches kids about bees. After school adventures, one-shots that are made to be completed in just a few hours. You can find it for Pathfinder, Pony Finder, 5th edition D&D, and Hero Kids. These are great products to play, to introduce kids to role-playing games, so definitely check out Playground Adventures at playgroundadventures.net. That's playgroundadventures.net, and tell them Tabletop Babble sent you.